What was yesterday? It's what started yesterday. Passover.
Passover.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Passover.
Yeah, neighbors had a cedar.
Yeah.
Oh, did they?
Yeah.
We had talked about one day.
I know, before the pandemic, we had talked about this class, about doing a Seder. And in fact, when, we came back in the building and came in here, we still had the notes up there about doing a Seder. So I was thinking about that this week.
Yeah.
And so I thought I'd say something to David about maybe next year,
And the
trying to
congregation
do
will-
a congregational kind of thing.
That would be
He's
nice.
interested in
And maybe
that.
we could do it with Orly. Since
Yeah.
we do it's about the same time that we do
The trialogue. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, some of you may know
And that's
that.
how I,
Okay.
there was a different synagogue that they did a number of years ago. They did a Seder that they.
Kleenex
opened up
is
to
here if anyone
community.
needs them.
We went to, I worked with a fellow, he's a professor, but he's from Turkey, and he invited Tom and me and some other people from work to their iftar dinner, which was before the end of Ramadan. So during Ramadan, they fast, no food or drink, water, anything between sunrise and sunset. And so we went to that iftar dinner. It was put on by the Turkish community in Richmond, which I didn't realize we had such a large Turkish community. But it's really, really interesting. Yeah, and really,
Yeah.
such nice people.
And the mosque, the Islamic Center of Virginia, because I went
Yeah.
to the dinner a couple of times with Satina. and
Fatima.
Lawrence.
Mhm.
So they start off with prayers and have everybody had a bowl of watermelon and dates.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
the first thing they did.
Yes.
And then have this big
Big
like
meal.
banquet, and they
Yeah.
did it every night
Yeah. Yeah.
during
During
Ramadan.
Yeah, it was really something.
Well, everyone probably knows that I'm in love with the Chosen series.
Yeah.
Okay, and the new season 5 of the series is out now, and it has it's basically centered around the Last Supper. Okay, it starts with Christ coming into Jerusalem and the Palm, and then every one of the episodes has something going on with the Last Supper, focusing on each one of the episodes. And there is in season 5, in one of the episodes, they are celebrating the Passover with Jesus and the disciples, and the women in the group are also in that group. And they have one scene where they do a traditional Passover call and response song. And are you familiar with what that's called? It's the Dayenu. Okay. And Dayenu means approximately, it would have been enough. Okay. Or it would have been sufficient, or it would have sufficed. Okay. And so it's a song, and actually in modern days, they will sing it. And you can go online and hear the Dayenu song being sung. And it's about being grateful to God for each of the gifts that were given to the Jewish people. And that's with regard to it would have been sufficient, or it would have been enough, had God only given them one of any of these, it would have been enough. That's what they sing. And basically it is recounts the story of Exodus and the history. And it has 15 stanzas, and 5 of them have to do with coming out of slavery. 5 of them have to do with the miracles, and 5 of them have to do with the closeness of God. And so we are going to do that. We're going to say the Dayenu, and all that you have to do is after each of these, instead of the psalm today, I'm going to do the Dayenu. In celebration of Passover. And you can say Happy Passover. I went and says, how do you greet a Jewish person at Passover? you know, and they have Hebrew that you can greet them, but also you can just say Happy Passover. You know. So Happy Passover, everyone. So all you have to do is after I read each of these, you would say, it would have been enough. So start. If he had brought us out of Egypt and had not carried out judgment against the Egyptians,
It would have been enough.
if he had carried out judgments against them and not against their idols.
It would have been enough.
It's a real important.
Yes,
Yes.
sir. And Michael, we're doing a traditional Passover call and response called Dayenu. You might know the song. But anyway, you might not. If he had destroyed their idols and had not smitten their firstborn,
It would have been enough.
if he had slain their firstborn and not given us their wealth,
It would have been enough.
if he had given us their wealth and had not split the sea for us,
It would have been enough.
if he had split the sea for us and had not taken us through it on dry land,
It would have been enough.
if he had taken us through the sea on dry land and had not drowned our oppressors in it,
It would have been enough.
if he had drowned our oppressors in it and had not supplied our needs in the desert for 40 years,
It would have been enough.
if he had supplied our needs in the desert for 40 years and had not fed us the manna,
It would have been enough.
if he had fed us the manna and not given us the Sabbath,
It would have been enough.
if he had given us the Shabbat and had not brought us before Mount Sinai,
It would have been enough.
if he had brought us before Mount Sinai and had not given us the Torah,
It would have been enough.
if he had given us the Torah and had not brought us into the land of Israel,
It would have been enough.
if he had brought us into the land of Israel and not built for us the holy temple,
It would have been enough.
and he built for us the holy temple, and it is enough.
It is enough.
Remind me what Shabbat is.
Sabbath,
Sabbath. So that's when he gave them the Sabbath, when they were in the desert. Is that the first?
well, it could have been, that's the Sabbath, I always thought was with the day of rest. in
Yeah.
Genesis.
Well, I'm wondering why
So maybe
they
they're silent about the tradition that
added in there. Yeah.
was further developed after the Exodus.
I don't know, I just know that that's what they say.
Yeah.
Something to research during
This will be interesting.
Yeah, that.
Some people don't talk about people.
Yeah.
But if you haven't been to see the Chosen, I think that you'd find it fantastic, wonderful. I think we were there. We saw that all three of the episodes are out now. The first has the first two episodes, then first three episodes, then another two episodes, and then another three episodes.
So
of
they're all on
season.
streaming or?
They're all
Or
on,
in the
they aren't
theater.
streamed yet, they're in the movie
In the
theaters
theater.
right now. Right. And it goes all the way from entering Jerusalem to Judas kissing Jesus. So.
So season 6 will be,
Does
season-
it use John's timeline or the Gnostic Gospels timeline?
whose timeline did they choose for? This,
Who's-
like for this week, for Palm Sunday to the crucifixion? They've tended to go by the Synoptic Gospels, haven't they?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it will be streamed as soon as it comes out of the theaters. It will be streamed. So last week, we started talking, Angie started our study on chapter 5. And in chapter 5, it's showing how the Jerusalem communities are in conflict specifically with members of the Jesus movement and the family of Annis, Annis,
Yeah.
I'll call him Anus.
Yeah. Perfect.
That's what he was, and I'll call him Annis if people like. You don't want to say something bad against the high priest.
That's right.
We're learning that. And in the beginning, the first conflict that Evans goes over is that between Jesus of Nazareth and the family of Annas. And we studied where Jesus was not really critical of Judaism or the Jewish people, that nothing could be further from the truth, Evans says, that he recited the Shema with approval in Deuteronomy, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. He was also commanded people to love one another. He, as in Leviticus 19, he took the message first to the house of, to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, okay, which we saw in Matthew and in Romans, where in Matthew it said, these 12 Jesus sent out with the following instructions: do not go among the Gentiles or enter any house of the Samaritans, rather go first to the lost sheep of Israel. And that in Romans, Paul says, I am not ashamed of the gospel because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jews, then to the Gentiles. So he was Jewish and fully Jewish and believed in the Torah. He was there to fulfill it, not to deny it. But what Evans is saying, and what we were studying last week, is that Jesus's actions in the temple is what set him on a collision course with the high priests. That he was saying things that and there is a scene in the where he goes in and he actually makes a whip and takes a whip in, because I think in some of the Gospels he has the whip. But he's interfering with the buying and selling of sacrificial animals and money, and the money changing. It said it had nothing to do with the long-standing traditions of sacrifice, but it had to do with he was angry because the temple's leaders are failing to live up to God's ordained task for the temple. That the temple is supposed to be a place where everybody, including the Gentiles, and if you remember the area in the temple, there was only one area where Gentiles could go to, and that had been turned into a place to trade and sell money. And like Angie mentioned last week, where they were really, you go to exchange money, and you would give them a dollar, and they would, it would only be worth 50 cents. Kind of trade war.
Someone was making a lot of profit.
So it says that in Isaiah 56:7, it's supposed to be a house of prayer for all people. And here, so Jesus went in and was driving the people out of that area and saying, this is supposed to be a place of prayer for these people. That's the only place that the Gentiles could come and pray. And it was a market.
I wonder how many Gentiles, actually would have gone into the temple to pray. I mean,
It was a big area, but
yeah.
yeah, anyone who wasn't Jewish, if they wanted to come, that's the only
where they
place
would
that they
go.
could come.
Yeah.
Could the women go beyond that spot?
The women went beyond there. There was a place for the women in the temple. The what did they call it? The court for the women's court.
Where Jewish women could go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Gentiles couldn't go past that one
No.
restricted.
And there was
male or
actually,
female.
and I
Yeah.
think even in Evan's book, he was saying that there's a sign. There's a sign there. Don't go beyond here for, or you'll be
Yeah, there were
killed.
warnings,
Yeah.
he talks about how there were warning
Mhm.
signs.
Yeah,
Don't, Gentiles can't go past you.
And this is also when they started doing the rope. Remember, I've talked about the rope
Yeah.
around the priest's ankle
To go into the.
to go into the
Holy
Holy
of
of Holies.
Mhm.
They
Oh,
tied a rope around, because if the priest wasn't holy enough to go in there,
you
they weren't
destroyed
going in.
and
to
it was
do
only, was it only one person, one named priest that could actually go in there?
The chief priest,
Right,
Priest, high priest.
the high priest.
Annas, or Caiaphas, as we have said.
Annas' descendants.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Right,
There was
right.
a number of them during this time.
I expect those chief priests being human probably got a little worried from time to time.
I would.
There's something tugging at my ankle.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why Annas turned over to his descendants, a lot of the work. That's speculation. You could-
Yeah. Well, and Annas and his sons and other members of his family, like Caiaphas was his son-in-law,
Hmm.
they basically were high priest or had their finger on the high priesthood all the way through to when the temple was destroyed. There were a few interlopers in there, but there was when I took a look at the list, there were one, two, maybe three or four that were not his relatives between the dates of 6 AD and 70. So we blame him for a lot of the issues with the conflict, him and his family.
He was kind of the power behind,
Yeah,
even
And-
when he wasn't the high priest that was named, he still
right. It
was
said
running
that
the show.
that
Yeah,
Mhm.
while having been officially removed from office, he remained one of the nation's most influential political and social individuals, aided greatly by the fact that his sons and his son-in-law served at some time as high priests. And in the Chosen, where he plays a big role, he's like the power behind his family members that are the high priest. And if you remember, at least in one of the Gospels, they take Jesus first to him before they take him to Caiaphas. But Jesus quotes in Mark that he quotes in Mark 11:17. Then he began to teach them, "It is written, is it not, my house is to be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have turned it into a hideout for bandits," or a den of thieves is what we're familiar with too, and a den of robbers. And this didn't go well.
Didn't
Didn't
sit
sit
well.
well.
Yeah.
Right. For the priests. And then we remember from last week where the cursing of the fig tree was directly before, the story of the fig tree was directly before and after what Jesus did in the temple, and it related to
the high priesthood.
the high priesthood. And we were talking last week about the fig tree, and I don't know whether we had gotten to it or not, but Bud was saying, how come he was cursing the fig tree? It wasn't the time for figs. And when we were watching The Chosen, it explains that a little bit in that, and we might have talked about it, but if I did, is that Jesus went to the fig tree and it was full of leaves. Remember, it did say that it had leaves. Okay. But even though it wasn't the season, when a fig tree has leaves, it'll have small figs on it.
Mm.
It'll have fruit. It'll be showing
Showing
fruit.
the fruit. Mhm.
It didn't. This didn't have any sign of ever showing fruit. And so that's why he cursed it.
there was no sign it was ever going to bear fruit,
Right.
just like the high
Right,
priest.
it
We're never
wasn't
gonna,
showing any sign of like going out to your apple tree. I'm going out to my little cherry tree, and it had all these little blossoms on it, but then when you go back, they weren't pollinated. You know, and so you might have one or two cherries,
Mm.
you know, on it.
I have a
Yeah.
long-standing personal relationship with a fig tree in my friend's yard.
Yeah,
They call me when things are starting to happen.
yeah. Well, you know, I would, if you have any they have ever had any extra figs, let me
I
know.
will do
Because-
that, but every now and then.
We go to Williamsburg and pick the figs.
do you?
Off of the fig trees, I'll take a little bag and go behind the buildings and pick the figs. And I can make some fig jam for Bud.
As the fruit ripens, all of the family comes and fills up on it, and by the end of the summer, they said, Michael, you know, everybody's got to fill. If you want to come, and I'll go and just pick
Uh-huh.
and pick and pick, and it's ripe. And all
Uh-huh.
right.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh.
So
Good
in,
luck.
yeah, in addition to the fig tree story, while he is in Jerusalem, he also tells in the presence of the high priest, the tenant farmer story. And he says in Evans says that Jesus alters and retells Isaiah's vineyard parable. Okay, he alters it in order to shift the blame away from the Jewish people to the caretakers of the vineyard, the ruling priests. And so in The Chosen, Jesus is telling this tenant story. Have you seen it?
No,
Yeah,
that's
Jesus
fun.
is telling the tenant story, and it was really fun because the disciples acted it out while he was telling it.
Yeah.
You know, it was fun to see that kind of thing happen. But he wasn't against the Jewish people, and he wasn't against many of the priests. It was the ones at the top who he said were responsible for this. And when he was telling this tenant story, and you remember the tenant story where they send, you know, he sets the vineyard up and sends people back to get the money from it, and then they shoo them away. The tenants shoo them away and don't pay, and then finally he sends his son and they kill him. So the ruling priests recognize that Jesus has told the parable against them. Okay, they know what he's doing. Okay, and it said they were trying to arrest him, but were afraid of the crowd. Realizing that he had spoken this parable against them, they left him alone and went away. And so I think that's where we kind of finished, you know, last week with Jesus, with the conflict with Jesus. But then Evans goes on to mention some other things with the conflict between Jesus and the family. And it says that Jesus's popular support makes it necessary for the ruling priests to arrest him at night and at a time when he's not surrounded by numbers of people, because they're afraid that they might get stoned if he tried to do that. They might, you know, because it said numbers of people who appreciate his teachings and they agree with him on his criticisms of the temple establishment, the temple high priests. So there's still a lot of rumbling among the Jewish people about what's happening in the temple, that they agree with Jesus on. And so betrayed by Jesus, okay, he is accused and seized by the ruling priests, their colleagues and supporters. And it says that they claim that he's accused of threatening to destroy the temple, and it says they actually had in Mark 14 and 57, It says, and then some men stood up and gave false testimony against him. We ourselves heard him say, I will destroy the sanctuary by human hands, and in 3 days I will build another not made by human hands. But even on this testimony, the witnesses that were saying this didn't really agree on exactly what happened. But Evans says that even though this was false, maybe false testimony by these particular witnesses, it sounded like something Jesus would say. Okay. And Jesus was saying that. And in Mark 13, he says, do you see these large buildings? Not even a single stone will be left on top of another that won't be demolished. And in John, Jesus answered them, destroy the sanctuary, and in 3 days I will rebuild it. So even though these men might have been giving false testimony, or they were kind of persuaded to give false testimony, it was something that Jesus was preaching.
It becomes alluding to him, that they can kill him in 3 days.
Right. And that's how I had always, that's how I had always thought. I'd never really thought of it as a complaint against the temple.
Right.
I'd always thought he was talking about, me.
Me.
In 3 days,
And the old rigid, I mean, you can tell when a church is alive, either you sit there and you say things that you always say and doesn't change your life or your perspective, but he's trying to bring life back into this, that you love God and you love your neighbor and you act like it, and you're aware of it around you. You can feel it happening. And I think that's his whole thing. He says, I'm talking about that dying and life coming back.
Yeah. And when he was talking about the temple not living up to that kind of legacy, he quotes Kings, and we might have read this last week, but in 1 Kings 8, 41 through 43, it says, now concerning the foreigner who is not from your people, Israel, when he comes from a land far away for the sake of your name, where people will hear your great name, your mighty acts, and your obvious power, when he comes and prays facing this temple, then hear in heaven where you reside and do whatever the foreigner asks of you, so that all people of the earth may know your name, fear you as you do your people Israel, and so they may know that this temple that I have built is called by your name. So that's one of the reasons that Jesus is saying you need this place for worship for these people who are not Jewish, and you've turned it into a den of robbers and thieves, and they can't worship there, any longer.
Who is the foreigner in what you just read? Is it supposed to be Jesus?
Gentiles.
But he said a foreigner will come and.
Now concerning the foreigner, now this is in Kings,
Okay.
First Kings and Old Testament, that they're telling this is what the temple is for.
Okay.
That
I see.
it's concerning the foreigner coming in, they should be welcome. When they recognize you as God, they can have a place to come in this temple. And
that's particularly bad because the Gentile area was where all the money changing and the selling was happening. And whereas I said last week, you bring your lamb for a sacrifice and they go, well, your lamb's not unblemished. So now you have to buy another one. And so they pay to get the unblemished lamb. Then the next person in line would buy the lamb that wasn't suitable.
Yeah,
they sell it
Yeah.
as unblemished.
And
right.
the people saw that was what was happening, and he's going, this is supposed to be a place of prayer, not a place where they look and see that God's chosen people are cheating each other and liars and
Right.
Well, the temple was a symbol of God and could be seen for miles. So, I mean, even, foreigners, whoever passing by could see this glistening temple of God from miles and miles away. So, I think some of that's involved here too, talking about in Kings, I mean.
I just find it, I don't know where I've been all these many years, but I find it fascinating that Gentiles were encouraged, it sounds like, to come into the temple. I mean, I always felt.
If they're coming there to, now some of those Gentiles might have been the people coming in to rob other people to sell sheep. I don't know whether you had to be Jewish. I would think that you might have to be Jewish to
I would think so.
trade the money and do the business side of things.
Right.
And of course, that's where the lavish abodes of the high priest, where the money comes from, you know.
Yeah.
And also the taxes, you know, when you have everybody around the whole area coming to Jerusalem and all of the taxes coming in, and a part of that goes to the Roman group, you know, that's where they get money.
There were also Jewish converts. I mean, you know, remember the story of Jonah, you know, so there were many Jewish converts also, or well, yeah, Gentiles converted to Judaism, but I don't think the converts were allowed beyond the gate, you know, the second gate.
Yeah, and not only was Jesus threatening, according to the high priest, threatening the temple, and threatening the high priest was also seen as threatening the temple. That I think that there's in Exodus, you are not to blaspheme God or curse the ruler of your people. Okay, and even in Acts, Paul is telling off the high priest. You know, he's calling him. I think the high priest ordered someone to slap Paul in the face, in the mouth, and Paul said, "God will strike you, you whitewashed wall." You know, and then the men standing near him said, "Do you mean to insult God's high priest?" And Paul says, "Oh, I didn't realize, brothers, that he is the high priest. After all, it is written, you must not speak evil about the ruler of your people." You know, kind of. So.
And the whitewashed wall was a reference to the tombs that were whitewashed on the outside but stunk on the inside.
Oh, right. That's a good point. Good point. Yeah, because that's mentioned a lot too. That, you know, the tree looks good on the outside, but it's rotten on the inside. Is what you were mentioning last week. You know. So also when Jesus is arrested, he is he is asked by the high priest before him and asked Jesus, "Don't you have any answer to what these men are testifying against you?" And Jesus kept silent. But then the high priest asked him, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" And Jesus says, "I am, and you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the power and coming with the clouds of heaven." And, you know, at that, the high priest tore his clothes. Okay. Says, no way, you know, is that, because they knew more about what Jesus was talking about than we do. With the insult, you know, that he was giving to them. And this particular statement, "Son of Man," at the right hand, is coming directly from Daniel, where in Daniel it says, "Someone like the Son of Man was coming accompanied by heavenly clouds." You know, so the high priest knew where Jesus was referring, what scripture. And to him dominion was bestowed along with a glory and a kingdom. Okay, in Daniel.
Remind me what Son of Man means. What does that?
I'm laughing because, I mean, there's whole books.
Yeah, but I
That
mean,
we
does
haven't
it mean
studied
that
yet.
he's the Messiah, or I mean, would they interpret that as meaning he's saying he's
They
the
didn't
Messiah?
interpret it well.
It means human. I mean, I think
He's more of a servant of man,
Yeah.
humanity.
I just wonder why they would take such offense at that term. I mean, it'd be different if he said, I'm the son of God. I can see why they
Right.
would take offense.
You will see the Son of Man
Yeah.
seated at the right hand
Hand of God,
of
so,
the power.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I always found that really confusing studying the New Testament
Yeah.
in school.
Mhm.
I went over it and over it, read it, still confusing.
Confusing.
Well, Jesus came as fully human, but also divine.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And he warns his followers about what to call them at certain points and then,
Yeah, don't
You
say
kinda-
that right now.
yeah, right.
You know, not
right,
ready for it.
Right.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then, so what Evans is saying here is not only is the temple an issue, but that him claiming that he's the Messiah, the messianic kingship. Jesus is guilty of sedition, for which he will be condemned by the Romans. You know, for he could be condemned from both parties, the family of Annas and the Romans for saying something like that. I think that Evans kind of ends the comparison or the showing the issues with Jesus and the family of Annas with some information from the Antiquities of the Jews by Josephus, and talks about sure. And it says Josephus gives an independent account. Yeah,
I know you're gonna lose half of us.
I'm just a third, we got the folks on
Well,
the team.
we can hold off on that.
No, we've still got 2/3 of it.
Okay. But in Josephus, Antiquities of the Jews in the in chapter,
Gentiles out there.
in chapter 18, it says, now there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man, for he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as received the truth with pleasure. He drew over to him both many of the Jews and many of the Gentiles. He was the Christ. And when Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men among us, and the principal men, Josephus was meaning the ruling priests, had condemned him to the cross, for those had, at the suggestion of the principal men, Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men among us, had condemned him to the cross. Those that loved him at the first did not forsake him, for he appeared to them alive again the third day, as the divine prophets had foretold these and 10,000 other wonderful things concerning him and the tribe of Christians. So this is the first time Christians was mentioned in, this is in Josephus. And the tribe of Christians so named from him are not extinct at this day. And this was probably written in somewhere around 93.
That's remarkable that Josephus calls him the Christ.
And so principal men, his account, Josephus's account doesn't specifically say why they condemned him, you know, the temple or whatever. But those that loved him, you know, did not forsake him. And because mainly because the Jesus movement, they're convinced that Jesus was resurrected. And to kind of close, I wanted to bring up something that I learned from some of the videos that I watched regarding The Chosen. And you might know this, but I hadn't known it before, that Gethsemane is not just an olive grove, it's Gethsemane stands for oil and olive, or an olive press. Okay, So in Hebrew, Gethsemane translates to oil press or olive press. It's a combination of two Hebrew words, gat meaning press or wine press, and simony meaning oil or oils. The name is thought to refer to the garden near the Jerusalem where olive trees would have been grown and olives processed for oil. And in the Bible, olives were pressed 3 times to extract the oil. The first press yielded oil for sacrificial use, the second for food, and the third for heating. The olive press in Gethsemane symbolizes the weight and suffering Jesus endured before his crucifixion, that they press and press and press. Jesus goes to pray 3 times. And just as the olives are pressed and oil runs, Jesus was pressed and blood runs. So I thought that was interesting.
Well, thank God they didn't press the oil 4 times.
That's right.
I mean, some of the stuff is kind of stretching out, we kind of make it up, whether it's Evans or somebody else. That's kind of a stretch to, associate the two, I think.
I find it uplifting.
Yep, but it's uplifting. for
Well, I
some.
mean, it's good. We can make up whatever we want to find things uplifting, but I'm just saying, not based on fact.
Harold, I'm an English major. We love that kind of symbolism. The more symbol,
Well,
the
I
better.
know, I know, but I'm just
You
saying,
cannot ignore
it's not,
symbols in the Bible,
Well,
or any other writing,
Yeah,
any other literature,
symbolism. If we didn't have symbolisms, our lives would be pretty cut and dry.
which is the way it should be.
Very simple.
Oh.
I get the-
Stop now with, this was all of the conflict with Jesus. Next week, we will talk about the apostles and conflict they had with the high priest, as well as Paul and Stephen. And he has a long list.
Next week.
I teach next week. yes.
Okay.